Welcome to Cut the Bull, an insightful podcast which addresses the news of the day and the cultural issues plaguing our society, bringing logic and context to these topics and discussing solutions too real for mainstream pundits. Now, here are your hosts, Charles Love, Shamika Michelle, and Wilfred Riley.
Hello and welcome to Cut the Bull. I am Charles Love alongside my co-hosts Shamika Michelle and Wilfred Riley. And our guest this week, we have two. We got bonus, maybe more than two, but currently we're with Luka Hein and Chloe Cole. Luka and Chloe, welcome to the show.
Thank you guys for having us on.
Well, it's great to have you. And obviously we want to talk about the issue of trans, detrans, the debate that is going on, the problems, and all of those things. And you can talk a bit about why you're together when we get there and tell a little bit about your journey here. But first, I guess I want to start in reverse. What are your thoughts about how big this conversation has become? Are you shocked by, now granted, we talk a lot here that a lot of the noise we hear on Twitter is not the real world because it's a small percentage of people, but that your life and your struggles are now being debated by so many people on your side and against you that don't have firsthand knowledge of it, but they think it's important. But did you expect it to be this big thing that the whole country is arguing about?
Yeah, I think it's also been very interesting to watch it go from a conversation of this doesn't happen and essentially ignoring the issue that detransitioners are even a thing, to it having to be like a national conversation now,
right?
Because of, the noise being made around it.
And I mean, a big part of the reason why this has gotten so far is because a lot of people have just seen it as like they've either ridiculed it or they've seen it as something that has absolutely nothing to do with them. Like it'll never affect me. It'll never affect my family or my friends. So I just shouldn't care about it and I'll just look the other way. And
I mean, it's kind of led to where we are today, where there's like the whole gender care industry has gone completely off the rails to the point where detransitioning has become a bigger issue due to their failure.
All right. I just think with all of the problems surrounding it, it's also just this different facet of we'll get you how oddly detransitioners are treated differently when you get into that phase than when you're at the start of your transition initially. One is celebrated and one is not, and that's obviously a problem. But it's just so many people, that seems to be in this conversation. They're getting really animated about it. So, don't you? What are your thoughts about how it's gone from something that in certain areas people talked about, something that maybe in academia people who are experiencing it would tell their experience, to now this big national fight where everybody, and then once it gets to the political level, obviously everything's changed. So what are your thoughts on that, Will?
Well, one of my thoughts is that there seem to be objectively a hell of a lot of detransitioners. Right. So, like as a quick intro, years ago, I wrote a book called Hate Crime Hoax. And I'm not saying that to like big myself up. The reason I wrote the book was that people kept saying that there were almost none of these sort of race hoaxes or kind of public violence hoaxes that were happening. Like the official estimate was like 20 a year or something like that. And I'm pretty active on the internet. So I'd be on Reddit or something, and there'd be these lists of like 2,000 that had happened. And I used kind of modern quantitative techniques, and I blah, blah, blah. But I found about 400 after looking for a couple of months. The list is now up over 1,000. And I have a similar feeling about this. I mean, there's a forum, I think it's r/detrans, where you have to say formally that you're a detransitioner. I don't see too many bros that are just interested faking this, frankly. I mean, you have to describe your experience, write this out, click through several buttons, go on, engage in the forum. And there are currently, I think, 42,600 members last I looked. So, empirically, it strikes me that there are a lot of people that have gone through this at least the level of taking blockers, taking hormones, that are now starting to speak out. And that's a pretty large chunk of the full population of people, which is almost certainly under a million, probably under 500,000 that have ever attempted transition. So I guess my question for you guys, as opposed to rattling on, would be, what do you think the number of detransitioners is really as members of that community? Like, how does that compare to the number of people that have transitioned? And do you think that number is going to grow?
I think actually counting like the number of detransitioners is a very hard thing to do. And it's also because, I mean, the way that the medical system and the trans community is set up has kind of made it a hard thing to do because of how they treat detrans people. I mean, I've said it where the people who practice gender medicine, it's better for them if someone has regrets or they want to detransition, it's better for them if that person just disappears from the clinic one day and never comes back, because then they don't have to confront that.
Right.
I feel like there is certainly a lot more detrans people that will speak out online where it's anonymous, but it is one of those things where it's very scary to put your face to these things because of how it is treated within these communities.
Right. And I mean, a lot of trans activists will cite the reasons for detransitioning being that people don't feel supported by their families, and so there's a social pressure, or they can't find a job, or that transitioning is too difficult for them. But and they say that the rate of detransitioning, for these same reasons, it's less than, those people make up less than 1%, 1 to 2% of the trans population. But the standard for these patients, what they say makes a transition successful, is that the person's suicidal ideation improves, and that they don't kill themselves, basically, which is a really low standard of care. But what I've seen with a lot of young transgender people that I know who are still identifying as trans, a lot of them, I see them at, a lot of them are in the same place that I was. They become a lot worse after they've started to transition socially or medically. And a lot of the same people, I see them as at risk of having a failure of a transition and detransitioning.
You also have the fact that they bring up the like 1 to 2% statistic, but that doesn't really apply to the fact that we've had something like a 4,000% increase in young people, mainly young women, seeking so-called gender affirming care.
Right.
And so while that may have been true, you know, a long time ago, it doesn't take into account this new cohort that we're seeing, which is unlike anything that has ever been dealt with before. And certainly there is no long-term data on it. There's not a whole lot even going into why there's this sudden spike. And so because of that, I feel like you're gonna have a lot more detransitioners when you have, you know, lower standards of care, a sudden spike and demographic change in those who are seeking care.
Right.
And then, you know, lack of follow-up.
If I could say one thing there quickly, like that's really well said. I agree with that. I don't know if you guys agree with this. I suspect you might. I'm not in particular an expert in this field, but one thing I noticed as a pretty good social scientist reading through a lot of the literature on this is that it seems like sort of half-assed activism. Like a lot of the it's extremely bizarre. I mean, a lot of the sort of 1% rates of detransition seem to represent, I recall one of them was literally people that had contacted the clinic. I don't recall the name of the paper. I don't want to ever invent anything, but it was people who'd been in contact with the clinic to say that they were no longer trans. That's extraordinarily weird.
Yeah, that's a lot of something. A lot of detrans people don't go back to their clinic, because why would they want to go back to the clinic that allowed this to happen?
Yeah, but no, absolutely right. But that's insane. Like what you would normally do if you're sort of an ethical researcher is you would expend a lot of time contacting everyone, making sure they were fine. You'd done a good job. You'd have everyone's name and number on file, and you'd go after them. I mean, that's just absolutely standard. I mean, in politics, if you're working with refugee women or something, I assume it's the same in psych for you guys. Like, so the time frame lessons for me, but the time frames are always like 3 months later, everyone was happy. What about 10 years?
Right.
I mean, so that's, I have a lot of questions.
Well, also with a lot of the studies that they use to even support, like, particularly transitioning children, they're not well done studies. They often don't have a control group. They're very limited in what they look into. They often don't have long-term follow-up, and they lose a ton of their, like, the people in the study to follow-up.
Right.
And then they're propped up as these very like weak studies that really don't prove anything are propped up to propel this like $1 million, gender medicine industry at this point.
Right. And a lot of these studies are really nothing more than self-reported surveys.
Mm-hmm.
And on the topic of how difficult it is to return to your doctors or providers who help you to transition, a lot of the time, even if you do, you won't get any help with detransitioning.
Wow.
You won't. I actually am someone who went back to my original doctor just to tell her what was going on. And, it was via Zoom call, because I don't think she takes in-person patients anymore at this point. But she essentially told me that this was just another step on my gender journey. And kind of pushed aside any actual concerns I had due to like my physical health from taking testosterone.
Well, wait a minute. That's really, I mean, because people don't know enough about this. So we have to talk about that a little bit. That's a little shocking. So you're saying for the people who transition, when they go through, obviously that's difficult when you decide to do it to begin with, and then to actually go through with it. You transition socially first, you actually have the surgery. It's months past, they get the happy check after a couple of months and they forget about you. You go through this struggle and you decide that it was a mistake, you wanted to change it. It's hard at that point already, but now you're saying you can't even go back to the doctor that did the surgery because they're like true believers. So they're casting you aside on the top of everything else. So how do you even do it if you don't go back to the doctor?
Well, here's the thing: is there's no real standards of care to help detransitioners at all. I went to a doctor through my university's health clinic just because I needed to get blood work done at that point. And she was nice enough, but she looked at me and she said, "I don't know what to do with you. There's no protocol for this," which isn't particularly reassuring to hear from a medical professional when you need help.
Right. Medical help, right?
Yeah.
Not mental help
I
or
heard
anything like that, but physical, mental, and actual surgery. And they're like, I don't know what to do.
I heard the very same thing from my gender specialist who referred me to surgery. I was talking to her over a Zoom call a few months after I stopped transitioning, after I told her that I regretted my transition. And she just told me like, well, this is just another part of your gender journey, right? It's just another transition.
Are they reading from
like there's no other course of treatment where you're told that the treatment being a failure is just part of the journey. Like if chemotherapy doesn't work in stopping your cancer from progressing,
right,
you don't just hear like, oh, it's just part of your cancer journey.
Right.
You also
but wait, but you, this is enlightening because we never know. That's why it's good to hear from people firsthand. Shamika, I want to get your thought on this. So with what they just said, obviously this fight is really complicated. I mean, they get attacked and they're treated as the social pariah, and if you say anything against it, all those complications, and you have to fight that. But maybe, what do you think about this? Maybe this is another angle. You know how they have these, Planned Parenthood would go into communities and open these abortion clinics, and people who were against abortion would do and act the way they did, and they would stand outside with signs, whatever. And then some people say, well, why don't we offer people alternatives, right? So they open these pregnancy centers. It's like, get the abortion if you want to, but we don't want you to. And if you want help with these services, you do this. Maybe someone needs to do a similar thing for people who transition, not pressuring them, saying you made a mistake and you should detransition, but say, if you want to, we're going to create an avenue either to force the care community to increase and enhance the level of care for them, but also to have funding for, if you want to get this done, now you're not looking for all this other stuff. So what do you think about that? Finding, I guess, in a way, a backdoor way to assist people who want to detransition.
I think having that alternative would be helpful to detransitioners or people that are just like questioning if they should transition in the first place, or maybe have other issues going on and don't feel helped by the medical community. But unfortunately, from what I know, things like that because they've redefined conversion therapy and things like that to be
Right.
anything that isn't
Yes, it
constant
would be considered.
affirmations,
Yeah, right.
it would be considered that, which would make something like, you know, a kind of like almost detransition or transition help center that doesn't affirm. It
Right.
would make that incredibly hard to set up.
That's true. That's true.
And I
Shamika,
also
go
I
ahead.
also feel like that should be the care for detransitioners should be handled by those same providers anyways.
But isn't the problem that those same those people, the medical professionals who are doing this, especially at the time, this time where they're just churning them out, right? It's like a factory, right? The incentive is only one-sided, right?
Right.
So they have an incentive to transition you. There is no
Mm.
incentive to detransition.
I mean, yeah, because there's an incentive to make someone a lifelong patient, but when that person wants to escape that, you know, you're essentially losing a customer if they want to go back the other way.
Right.
It really is a whole train of problems backing this.
Wow. Shamika, what, I know you have questions.
I do. For the listeners,
That's you.
I would like to get a little backstory
Right.
on both so that everybody's on the same page. How'd you even get here? You know, how old were you? All of those things. Just
Yeah, I
so
definitely
that-
want to get into the age thing because
Yeah.
it's shocking how young they're doing it now. But you, either one of you, you can start by telling, briefly talk about how you, what made you decide to do it and how you kind of got to the point, even before the point that you felt that you needed to detransition, but what made you transition in the first place. Chloe?
So I started transitioning socially when I was at the age of 12, meaning that I would just like, I started cutting my hair shorter. I started buying more clothing from the boys department in stores, and I changed my name. And after a few months, I came out to my mom and dad through a letter. I told them that I wanted to be their son instead of their daughter. And I mean, they were cautious. They wanted to be supportive of me, and they wanted me to be happy and feel comfortable with myself, but they also didn't want me to make any permanent decisions until I was at the very least 18, when I would be legally an adult and more capable of making a long-term decision for myself. But so they decided to bring me to a therapist because they didn't really know much about this subject, and they wanted some professional help with this.
Mm-hmm.
But pretty much almost immediately, I was only affirmed in this identity I had, this idea of myself that I wasn't actually the daughter to my mom and dad. I was their son, and I was a boy. And that was just the way things were. And eventually I started seeking interventions like hormones. And this concerned my parents. But when they brought up their concerns to my gender specialist, they were just told, I mean, they were completely brushed off. I mean, they were told like, well, the rate of regret, it's clinically not significant. It's less than 1 or 2%. And they didn't present any other options. They just said, well, transgender adolescents have a higher rate of attempted and completed suicides. And if you don't affirm your daughter in her identity, if you don't allow her to transition and become her true self, then she will kill herself. And with that, my parents were scared. They were bought into it.
Right. And you were
I
how
mean,
old at this time?
I was 12 going on 13. And
When they started you on hormones?
yeah. I was
Wow.
13 when they started me on the first. They started with puberty blockers, and then a month after that they put me on testosterone. And this was just about half a year after I was diagnosed with gender dysphoria.
Mm-hmm.
Mm. Wow.
Okay. Would you like to hear? I had a question, but I think we should let Luka go. Then I'll go.
So I was like, I was a teenager that had multiple mental health issues. There was stuff going on at home. And I was also actually heavily like groomed and preyed upon and exploited online to the point of, authorities getting involved from that. And I kind of spiraled into this hatred of both myself and my body. And I ended up in a partial hospitalization program. And while I was there, I brought up the fact that I had seen stuff that was like, oh, well, if you don't like your chest, or you don't like your period, or you don't like, how your body's shaped, that doesn't mean, that maybe you're just uncomfortable because you're a teenage girl. It means that you're a boy born in the wrong body. And so while I was in that program, I talked to the therapist about it, and she was like, oh, well, we need to tell your parents so that way they can get you the actual help you need with that. Because obviously this mental health facility was not equipped to really handle that at the time. I was 15 at this time. And, so they told him, and as soon as we told my parents that, it went down the route of, you have to affirm, would you rather have a dead daughter or a living son?
Ooh.
And my parents, obviously, they wanted to do what was best. They trusted who they thought were the professionals that had like solid evidence to back this up. And so it ended up with my first medical intervention I ever had was a double mastectomy at 16. And then after that, I was put on hormones, also at 16, just a few months later. Yeah, and then I took testosterone for 4 years up until I was 20.
Wow.
Okay, I'm going to go back to you, Shamika, but I have to have one question because I want people to understand this. A lot of this belief, I mean, it's almost like it was always because there's medical issues that these medical doctors are doing these surgeries, and people are rightly saying, questioning it in general and definitely at the adolescent stage. But when I hear people talk about that, what they'll say is, well, gender dysphoria, they should get seek a professional to give them the mental help that they need. Mm-hmm. But it's kind of scary to hear that that's the route they took, right? It's not like
right.
You said that and they just said, go have a surgery. It's like, well, this is gender dysphoria. Why don't you treat it as a mental condition and let them deal with that and assess it? And you did. And now we're at the point that they're saying, yeah, well, just affirm. It's almost like threatening. It's like affirm, they're going to kill themselves, right?
And that really is the thing.
Your loving parents, both of you,
doesn't help.
Your loving parents said, okay, I don't think this is the best thing for them, but I want them to live and I want them to be happy. So whatever they need to do to be happy, this is what we're going to do. Then it got to the physical, but you can't even say that if only they had gotten, the mental care they needed, they'd be fine, because they're also it's like there's a chain pushing them to the same factory. So regardless of which door you go in, you're going to end up in the same factory.
My mental health provider actually worked with the gender clinic.
It's a combo. It's a combo.
Yeah,
it's all on the same coupon.
And it's one of those things where to actually work through an issue, you don't just tell someone, yes, we're going to affirm the issue we're having. Yes, you're valid. Yes, you actually work through why they're feeling like that. And just going, yes, you are correct is not how you solve an issue, especially with, an adolescent who is trying to figure themselves out.
Right.
Shamika, Will?
Well, I'm wondering, so from 16 and having your double mastectomy, and then you, Chloe, as well as being, you said, 12, 13 years old, how long did you live that way before thinking like something isn't right, or, I'm feeling like I made a mistake?
And first thoughts, not the fact that you got to detransition, but the first time you thought that maybe I shouldn't have, I went the wrong direction here.
For me, it was about 4 years. So from 16 to, 20. During my freshman year of college, I actually, I had obviously done a lot of growing at that point. I had matured a lot. I had really started to think about what I wanted for my life. I also, at some point, I stopped taking the antidepressant, anti-anxiety, SSRI I was on. And after I got off that, it felt like I was actually able to feel stuff again and really process emotions in a way that had kind of stunted me, because I was on those for my entire teenage years.
Right.
And so I got off that, and that was the first time it really hit me of like, is this what I want? And then, life happens, that kind of got put on the back burner of my brain for a bit. And then it was really this past fall, like around, late August, September, that I really started thinking about, what do I want for my future? What do I want that to look like? What do I want for my freedom? Because I wasn't happy being chained to like a medical system where I need to have a doctor nearby. I need to have a pharmacy nearby. I need to be doing weekly injections.
Mm.
And then, there's obviously the physical health aspect of the fact that, my joints had fallen apart. Just in general, just kind of watching my body kind of waste away from this. And it got to a point for me where I was like, I can't do it anymore. Like this, I'm living a lie and I can't do this anymore.
For me, I mean, my entire medical transition lasted for about 3 years, maybe give some months. And when I was 15, just after the very end of my sophomore year, I had the same intervention that Luka started with. I underwent a double mastectomy. And up until that point, I never really had any negative feelings about transitioning or testosterone. But I started having to deal with the reality of the surgery and having to look down at these big wounds that were on my chest, having to redress and put the bandages back on every night. And the sensation of having the stitches taken out and this numb feeling across this area of my body. And then eventually realizing that being a male wasn't exactly as I had hoped it to be. I mean, my grandfather on my mom's side went completely bald, I think, by the time that he was like 45, and I didn't want to eventually face that for myself. And on top of that, it was a lot more difficult socially. I didn't really feel like I could speak up, like I could talk about my emotions or my struggles very much in my relationships with my family, my friends, people from school, and otherwise just weren't as fulfilling as they used to be. And I was very lonely. And I also realized I miss looking feminine. I miss wearing makeup and playing with my hair and wearing skirts and dresses. And I just started to go into a downward spiral until sometime late in my junior year, I took a psychology class. And towards the end of the unit, I was learning about things like child psychology and development and parenting and maternity. And I was 16 at this time. And that was when it really started to hit me, like this path I was taking was also going to take something beautiful and unique away from me by the time that I was an adult. I mean, now that I've had my breast removed, I'll never have that special experience of breastfeeding my kids. And I still don't know whether I'll be able to conceive, but I may not even be able to have children. Mm-hmm. And really that horrified me. And that was what took me out of the illusion that this is really taking more than it's giving to me.
Well, speaking of that really quickly, you talk about, so if you go back to when you were living as biological girl, you had these questions, these thoughts, you go to your parents, you tell them all this, and you say, I really believe that I'm boy and I'm in the wrong body. And then obviously your therapist make the mistake of pushing you that way. So you transition. So, immediately after, before you get to the point that you're questioning, did it ever make you feel more male? Or did you say, because if you already felt that you were male and this body doesn't really fit what I think, once the body and all of that matched, did you say, okay, now I really feel male? Or was there ever, did the questioning continue?
I mean, there is an aspect of that, because I mean, even when you take testosterone, or even if it's the surgery, like
right,
you're told this thing will help, and you're told
and then the drugs
over and over
then you're
again.
taking drugs, right?
And then you're taking something that is essentially a steroid. It's going to give you more energy. It has like natural antidepressant properties. You're going to feel good for a while.
It changes your
until
voice,
it doesn't, until it doesn't, and then like your body's falling apart.
Right.
But these are also things that, like, when you're in this community, you genuinely believe these are going to help you because it is the only thing you are ever told is going to help you. So of course, after you get it done, you're like, yes, I've been told this is going to help me. And even if it's like the world's strongest placebo, you believe it because what else do you have at that point?
Right. But there is the honeymoon period and nobody ever talks about that.
Yeah, I was wondering, do they tell you the downside, like the side effects, or, you know, do they run down all of that in this whole counseling?
I was given a sheet of paper that had some of the side effects on it, some of them. And a lot of them next to like, it would say like what the effect of the testosterone was, when you can expect that change to start, and then when you can expect the change to end, and then on another column it said whether or not it was reversible. And for a lot of the ones for the reversible, it was essentially an I don't know. It was we don't really know, depends, which, you know, looking back, not reassuring. But it's also one of those things where there is a lot that they didn't tell me was ever possible. I didn't know it was possible for certain parts of my body to atrophy away. I didn't know it was possible to cause joint damage everywhere. You know, I didn't know it was possible for the fact it will permanently make my vocal cords ache. You know, all these things that I one, like, was not made aware of, but also, you know, I was 16 and doped up on a bunch of antidepressants. I don't think anyone in their right mind would have looked at me and said, yes, you can consent to being a lifelong patient in this way, and you can consent to these long-term impacts before your brain is even developed or you're an adult.
Right. And I mean, even the healthiest 16-year-old or anybody under 18, or even many people under 25, know just what they're getting themselves into. I mean, like she said, they don't really give the full picture of what these treatments can do to you physically or even mentally. I like her, I was given a pretty vague list of side effects for the testosterone and complications for the surgery. I don't think I was even given any forms for the blockers. Wow. And they were talked about a little bit in the appointments with the endocrinologist and the surgeon, but again, they didn't really go into depth. Most of the side effects that I'm facing now weren't even listed on the forms. And
well, let me ask you one last thing, and I'm gonna throw the mic back to Will. When Buck was on, up until I had the conversation with Buck, I never thought about the fact that that's right. You know, this was the whole trans women or women, trans men or men thing. But you're like, well, biologically, a biological woman or man isn't taking drugs on a regular basis to maintain, right? Because Buck mentioned that I have to continue to take testosterone. But what I didn't think about, but what I didn't think about was I met a detransitioner, and he told me that now I detransitioned. I think lived as the other gender for about 8 years. Is that now I have to continue to take drugs, you know, because I took estrogens for so long. I'm a biological man, and I have to take testosterone on a regular basis. And that was just shocking. I mean, there's so much that we don't even think about.
It like shuts down your endocrine system to pump your body full of all of these different hormones that your body does not naturally produce.
Not to mention it affects pretty much every other area of your health.
Yeah, I've described it as, in terms of damage, surgery took away one part of me. That affected one part. Hormones, taking testosterone, damaged literally everything else. It did the rest of it.
Will.
Yeah, I mean, so I've actually taken some notes, and you guys are just doing a great job of breaking this down. But I mean, so there are two things that stand out to me here, like looking at this. One is that it's wild to me that we're giving hard drugs to people, especially kids, young people, and we're acting like there's something fucking magical about the fact that people like them initially, like this is some kind of super science. I mean, like, so obviously people react well to, say, Adderall and initially do better in school because it's speed. The side of a bottle of Adderall has two ingredients. It's amphetamine and salt. Like you can literally just read them. I mean, and this is a level up from that. I mean, testosterone is just tea. It's what people try to sell you in gym. So of course, initially there's going to be a surge of aggressive positive feeling, and then that's going to wear down, but the damage to your body from taking pure T, anabol, is going to continue. So giving this to kids strikes me as absolutely insane. That's banned in every athletic competition. You'll be thrown out of varsity sports at any level if you take. Yes, it's absolutely the most illegal anabolic steroid. That's what anabolic steroids are. They're just pure testosterone-based steroids. So that to me is absolutely insane. I will say that at least for adult male athletes, we do know most of these negative side effects. As a young guy who wasn't bad at sports, I considered taking this drug and absolutely decided against it. So I mean, I think it's absolutely immoral to give this to young people because it will make them men or something like this.
We also have somewhat of an idea of what it can do to the female body through female bodybuilders who have taken steroids.
Yes, absolutely.
And all of a sudden, there was a video a while ago I saw of a detransitioner who went into their doctor as a detransitioner, and they're like, "Oh, we don't really know what this does." But then, she went to a different doctor as a female bodybuilder who had abused steroids, and all of a sudden they could give her all the answers of all the negative stuff this does to her body.
That's brilliant.
Not surprised.
Wow.
Yeah, not one other very quick point though. Like another thing is the utter absence of evidence again for a lot of these activist claims. And then I have a question for you guys. But like, so the thing about suicide, I actually pulled up the suicide rate while everyone was kind of talking and going back and forth. And like the youth suicide rate doesn't seem to have budged much for the past 30 years. If anything, it's increased. Like there's been a subtle but real increase. So if the argument is that trans kids, quote unquote, are going to kill themselves, going to take their own lives, if they're not immediately affirmed, there's no evidence of that whatsoever. If
they don't let them get that far. They pump them with drugs right away.
No, but I mean, like, if anything, like during the era of affirmation and social media, like kids have become more likely to kill themselves. So there's like no like
have not only that, but the way that the trans community talks about suicide goes against every professional and responsible way you should talk about it, to the point that they contribute to like the documented social contagion factor of being suicidal. Right. It goes against the very way, even the CDC, the way that they talk
bluntly,
about it.
The way it strikes me is like your abusive goth girlfriend in high school. Like, if you don't do this, I'm going to kill myself.
Yes,
like, it's literally just like,
exactly that.
You have two choices. I mean, so like,
it is exactly
you don't want to make fun of it, but like, you could lose me. So, I mean, like, all of this, it doesn't sound at all like the kind of neutral science you would expect from your therapist. It just sounds like activist people bullshitting. But my one quick question, when you guys were going into these very serious psychological scientists, did they actually tell you, like, this will make you male? Like, I'm curious about the level of, like, witch doctoring. Like, was it like, if you take these pills, you will become perfectly happy as a human and you will become male? Like, was that sort of thing actually presented, or was it like, this is kind of a risky therapy and this might help you? What was the approach?
It was a little bit in between, but definitely more sort of leaning towards the like, this will make you, and not male, but you'll pass as a man, you can live as a man.
Okay.
All that stuff, but it definitely was more towards that side of it than that these are risky, experimental treatment side. Like, that was never discussed with me. It was one of those things where it's like, oh, well, this will help you be your true self. You'll live. It'll fix your gender dysphoria. It will help you. That once again, that line about, if you repeat it, if you've heard this enough times when you're vulnerable, that this is the only thing that will help you, and this is all you have.
Yeah.
Like, of course you buy into it.
Yeah. I mean,
by the way, you guys strike me as really impressive and brave talking about this. I mean, there's just the element of bullshit from the professionals here is offensive to a certain level. Like, here, you can take this well-known steroid from the gym and it's going to enable you to change your sex. I mean, like, there's the level of nonsense is like at voodoo par, in my own opinion. So
it's alarming that it's also being held up by like as a medical standard, despite like the lack of evidence and the fact that it really is just all kind of BS, and like it doesn't make sense if you think about it for more than like a minute.
I have a question.
And then there's religion.
Oh, yeah.
I'm just kidding. People can believe things at large scale for a long time, but
that is true. We have to talk about that on a side note one day, Will. So do you think there's like an agenda, or do you really think that these counselors or therapists or doctors like truly believe sincerely that they are helping and making people better?
I think it is a mix of both, because I still have enough hope for humanity that I think some of these people genuinely do think that this is what they've been taught will help people. And so they think they're doing a very good thing.
Right.
I think it's rather disingenuous to paint every single professional working on this as like an evil person with an agenda.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, I think there definitely are people that have agendas. I mean, you see the clips of, what was it, Vanderbilt, that came out, and it was someone saying that they could fund entire hospitals on the lifelong patients they make these kids when they go through this. They talk about the money side. They talk about, making sure kids learn about this younger and younger, despite the fact that their brains cannot comprehend that because they are children and they need to grow up. You see them ignoring the fact that 80 to 95% of kids with gender dysphoria would grow out of it if left alone. And then, when you see the attempt to like purposely medicalize those kids, that is where you can kind of see, yes, there's some sort of agenda. But there are definitely people that, good people can do bad things. The path to hell is paved with good intentions. I'm sure quite a few of these professionals genuinely believe that they were helping people.
Well, we're going to have to end soon, but we got to mention this because as I started out in the conversation talking about, there's this big national debate about this. And people are fighting about whether it's affirming or whether it's hurting, whether you just a transphobe and all this other stuff. But there's splits, there's divisions that have to be made. So some people like to, and Will alluded to it earlier, like, talking about how people mix in gay and all this other things, like that's the same thing. So that's a separation, true. But even even when you're just talking about transitioning, there's a difference between somebody who's like, I felt this way for a while, I'm 42 years old, here's $20,000, I want this surgery. And so it's coming from me saying I want to transition. And that's different from somebody saying, I feel something different that doesn't feel right and I don't know why, and I'm 14, and then having an adult professional say, well, obviously the solution is for you to cut your breast off, right? So I think that a lot of this gets lost because we treat it all as one same thing. It's the LGBTQ plus, it's all the same thing. Age, the age difference doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if they're 40 or 13. Well, no, let's have those other debates, but let's talk specifically about people from 6 to 16, how you have these conversations. What do you do when they're dealing with these struggles, and what you should or should not allow them to do to their bodies and put into their bodies? I think that should be a rational place to start, and we work our way to the other ones. What is so weird about that? Because I'm oddly, and Shamika and I joke about this, this is the one topic that I get attacked on, not race, not anything else. It's the one topic that I get called a transphobe and somebody who's propping up this ideology, and I don't see how.
It's almost, ideology really is the best word for it, because it's become, instead of like a genuine like discussion of ethics and like the science behind it, and allowing kids to grow without this outside influence or medical influence,
right?
It has become like an ideology where you cannot ask questions. And I feel like that should be the biggest red flag for anyone in this conversation. If you are in a group and they are not even allowing you to ask any questions about what they're doing and what's going on, like you might want to reconsider.
How about this? Here's the best question. How about they say whatever, I feel this, I want this, I feel this. What's wrong with this? Just one to us. Can it wait to 18? How about we start with that question? If you really want to transition at 22 and you transition, what, you lost 4 years? So what? Right? Why do you have to say, well, the only way to fix this problem is to do it at 15?
Well, the argument I've heard against that is that putting these kids through, right, and reminder, many of them, they were left unmedicalized.
Suicide. They're going to kill them. They'd never make it to 22.
It's either the suicide, or I've also heard that putting them through the quote unquote wrong puberty is literal violence, despite the fact that that is what your body would just naturally be doing if you were not born in this hyper specific time period, where that is an argument. But it really is one of those things where I feel like for the kids especially, it is a combination of people not really having how you twist like how teenagers are uncomfortable, the twisting of that into a
Right.
medical industry,
Because that's even normal.
makes them lifelong patients. And the younger you get them, the more money you can get out of these
True.
patients.
True.
And so it's twisting, you know, like I said, normal teenage feelings of being uncomfortable. Because somehow throughout my entire like transition issue, the concept of no, it is normal to be like very uncomfortable in your body when you're growing and developing, that was never like broached for
Right.
some reason. That never came up as soon as the trans thing was mentioned. And it really is, you know, the product of just, well, you want the kid to feel okay. And for some reason, we've only twisted this into you can only affirm their ideas as opposed to providing the healthy boundary that adolescents and children need, because they need that boundary there. And instead of, you know, keeping it there and allowing them to grow and maybe push that boundary a little, but push it in a healthy way, we've turned it into where we've not only taken the boundary completely away, but we put a medical industry right there to pipeline them down towards.
Right. Yeah. I can't imagine. I remember being in the 7th grade, and that's when you had to shower after gym class. And I can remember looking at some of the other girls who were well developed and feeling uncomfortable in my body because I ain't have nothing. So I just can't even imagine, you know, some adults saying, kind of taking the fact that I'm uncomfortable at that point and just running with it and saying, I need to go in a different direction, when really I was just slow at developing. It was embarrassing. I felt like, you know, she ain't got no pubic hair. I was going to get picked on, you know, and as a child, that's kind of magnified. It seems like a really big deal at that age, when it's not even that much of a big deal. But if you have these grown adults who make it a big deal, then you feel like, okay, they're leading me in the right direction that's going to help me not be uncomfortable.
Right. Will, you got any last thing before I ask my last question?
I can't think of anything.
You're on mute, Will.
No, I don't think I have any other questions right now.
Okay. Well, I know we have to end shortly. Unfortunately, this could go on. We can learn so much more. But I guess the last question is simply, what can we do to help you push back against this? And then if you can, talk a little bit about why you all are together physically right now.
And add in the parent aspect, if you would, while you answer that. Like, what should parents do if they encounter children that say these things?
I think one of the most important things that both parents and just like adults in society in general can do is really just protect a child's ability to grow up whole and unmedicalized, and really allow them to explore themselves in a way that isn't, you know, taking their first moment of being uncomfortable and running with it. Because the kids really do need that chance to grow up. Absolutely. You know, also there's, you know, monitor what your kids are doing on social media. Just that goes for everything, really, not even this topic, because it's a scary world out there on the internet. But also, you know, even just having the conversation about the fact that there's more detransitioners, about the fact that the medical industries or the medical systems that came up with the idea of transitioning children have now rolled it back and called it like a medical mistake. Right. Like they don't allow the systems that came up with this aren't doing it anymore because they've realized that kids need to grow up. And really just amplifying that is a way to kind of push back against all the anger on the other side in a very calm, collective, and compassionate way. Because we all want kids to grow up. We want them to be safe. We want them, you know, to feel comfortable in themselves. And it's a shame that there's now an industry preying on that the way that this one does.
And tell us about the Detransition Awareness Day.
Yeah, so we're hosting a rally tomorrow, actually. I don't know when this is going to come out or if this is...
Well, it'll be today. You'll be saying, we're hosting a rally today at 1 o'clock.
So it's on the 10th of March. The actual day of Detrans awareness is on the 12th of March, but we had to schedule it on the 10th just for because there's so many events around this time. Right. But it is a rally that is solely focused on detransitioners and our experiences, our struggles, and our needs that are not being met. And it is not politically affiliated. It is not anti-trans, no matter what they tell you. it is not about transgender people. It is about our experiences as
Mhm.
detransitioners.
Wow.
And
Well,
we're hosting the rally in Sacramento in front of the Capitol.
wow, at the Capitol. Well, good for you. I wish you all the luck. They are Luka Hein and Chloe Cole. Thank you for joining us.
Of course. Thank you guys for having us.
Country to say, Patriot J, I'm saving the day. Patriot J, I'm saving the day from you commies who lame. No, you can't fuck with me. I got a country to say. God bless the US of A, land of the free and a home of the brave. God get all of the praise. I got a country to save, cause I'm Patriot J and I'm saving the